All right. Welcome, everyone, to our webinar today. My name is Dominic. I'm one of the co-founders and the CEO of Five. Thanks, everyone who's dialed in already and who's joining us today. There are a few familiar names on the attendee list, so welcome, everyone. Really happy to see you here. Today, we want to take you through the process of building a web application within 30 minutes. So we've set ourselves a pretty tight timeline, but I'm pretty confident we can do it. Now, before I hand over to Pranoy, who's here with me today, he's our product advocate. I'll quickly give an introduction to the company, to Five, who we are. I've already mentioned we're based in Brisbane, actually. We're a Brisbane headquartered organization, and we've developed a tool that makes it easier to build and deploy cloud-based business applications. Now, usually one of the first questions that we get is, why is the company called Five? So let me give you a quick introduction to our company name. For those of you who have studied software engineering, programming, computer sciences, you might be familiar with the evolution of programming languages. Programming really started back in the 1950s when the first generation languages came out. Those were machine languages, so humans had to speak in the language of the computer, being ones and zeros binary. But luckily, computer languages, programming languages have evolved over time. And as they've evolved, they've become more natural language-like. And because they've done so, the simplicity with which we build software applications has increased. That's the whole idea. So we went from first generation languages to fourth generation languages. Now, why is the company called Five? It's pretty obvious by now. We've chosen Five as our company name because we see ourselves in that evolution of software engineering, and Five makes it even easier to build and deploy applications. Now, the type of application that we're focused on are typically cloud-based business applications. So when you use Five to build the application, your typical use case would be an internal tool, a business partner portal, a line of business application, or an online database application. That can be as simple as converting an Excel file into a more secure web application. And it can take you all the way to building complex auctioning systems, as one of our customers has done, on top of Five. Five gives you a lot of pre-built components that you can use inside your application development. That's why we make it faster to build applications. But you can almost always use full code as well to build the application. And when I say full code, I'm referring to SQL, to JavaScript, and to TypeScript. So much in terms of introduction to the company and to our platform. As I said, I'll keep it very short. I'll now hand over to Pranoy, who will take you through the process of building an application on top of Five. If anyone has any questions, maybe last point from my side, there's a Q&A feature right inside of Zoom. Feel free to post your questions there, and we'll come back to them at the end of the presentation.
Yep. Okay, so thank you, Dom, and hello, everyone. Let me just start off with quickly introducing myself. I am Pranoy. I'm the product advocate here at Five. And as Dom said, Five is a low-code development environment that helps developers rapidly build and deploy business applications. Okay, so without further ado, let's get started with Five. Now, when you first download and install Five in your system and you open it up, this is the first page you're going to see, which is a landing page. Now, you can see that you have a bunch of resources over here that you can use to get started. But let's talk about how do we get started from here. Okay, so in order to make your first application inside Five, we simply hover here on this applications tab on top. And now in order to make a new application, we click on this yellow plus button. And now we can start off with naming it. I'll just call it my first app. And once I'm done with that, I'll click on save. And once my application is done saving, it'll appear here on this list. And now I get access to this blue manage button. And when I click on that, now I get transported into the development environment of Five. Now on top here, you can see there are a bunch of menus. I have visual, logic, data, task, I have setup and tools. Now all of these will have a bunch of features inside it. For example, if I go to visual, it has forms, form wizards, and charts. And similarly, logic has functions and coordinators. So basically, you can use all of these pre-built components and features to start building your applications inside Five. For example, what I have here right now is an application that I made in front of you called as my first app. So let me just run it and show it to you how Five handles imaged brand new applications. So in order to run an application, we simply click on this run icon here on the header bar on top. And now Five opens up an application in front of me. And as you can see, this is what our new application looks like. We get a header bar on the top with some widgets with avatar, notification icons, and a hamburger menu. And we also get a sidebar on the left. This is completely by default by 5. Apart from that, we have no other features. It's a completely blank application. So let me exit out of this. And now let's start actually building something on it. So let's say that we are a developer and we have a table in a database. Let's say that we have a product table in a database, and we want to populate that using a form on a front end. Now, this is a very simple use case, but the question is, let's see how quickly we can do that inside 5. Okay, so my first step would be to create a table, a product table. So before going that, let me just explain something really quickly, is that whenever you make applications inside 5, every application in 5 comes with its own dedicated MySQL database. And what that means is it gives you an ability to create tables right inside 5. So if we clicked on data, and now if you click on table wizard, you see this interface through which you can get started. So I'll just call it my product table. I can add in 3 fields here. I'll call my first field its name, its SKU, and its price. Over here in this lookup, you can see that I can change this data types to any supported SQL data type over here. So what I'll do is I'll change price to float, and I'll give some default sizes to the name and SKU just to be safe. And once I'm done with that, I'll simply click on save. And now 5 asks me if I like to populate this table with some pre-existing data if I have in my database. But since it's a new application and this is our first table, we'll just simply click on save. And I'm done. Once I'm done building a table, if I click on data, and now if I click on database model, I get to see my table right in front of me. Now, this is not just a simple UML diagram. This is actually a visual database modeler. What that means is that anything that you did inside the wizard can be also done inside the database modeler. For example, let's say that you want to change some details of one of its existing fields. Let's say that you want to play around with the name field. So you simply double click on name, which opens up all of its details. So you have all the freedom that you want over here. I'll just click on done. Similarly, if you click on this add fields button, you can add more fields to your table, and you can click on the add table button here to add a table inside a database. Now, let's say that we don't want to build tables inside database, and we already have an external database sitting somewhere, and we want to connect that inside 5. So yes, 5 also supports external databases. For example, if you clicked on data, and now if I click on databases, you can see right now we have a MySQL database, which is the database 5 gives you by default. But of course, we can connect to an external database by click over here. You can reset this database. You can import it as an SQL dump, and you can also export it as an SQL dump as well. And as I said, we also support external database, which includes MS SQL, Postgres, and SQLite. Apart from that, let's say that we do not want to build tables and we don't even want to connect to an external database, but we want to use an API as a data source. So what we can do is, instead of building tables or connect to an external database, if you click on data, and now if you click on connection wizard, okay. So now if anyone here is actually familiar to Postman, you'll find this interface very familiar. Basically, what 5 is asking you is that's asking you for all of your endpoints for your get all, read single, create single, update, and delete for your API. And once you pass in all of your endpoints over here, you can essentially use any APIs as your data source as well. So just as a quick recap, 5 gives you an internal MySQL database. You can, on top of that, you can connect to any external database of your choice, and you can use any REST API as data source as well. Okay. So since we've talked about data sources a lot, let me just talk about something else. Let's talk about writing queries. Now, since we can actually build tables inside 5, it's probably not a surprise that we can write queries as well. So we click on data and then queries. We click on add item. Now, first thing my query asks me is for which database I would like to build my query off. Since we only have one MySQL database, I'll just select this one. Let's give it some ID. I'll give it, say, product query. And now when I click over here, now 5 opens up this editor, which is very similar to MySQL Workbench. For example, you can write any complicated queries as you want over here. So let's say if I do a select star from our product table, and we click on run. Now you see, I get to see my results right here. But since we have no records, since it's a completely new table, it simply says no records. But we do get to see all of our fields here in front of us. It's name, SKU, and price. Okay. But let's say that we are a developer, we do not actually write we do not like writing SQL. So what we could have done is, if someone is here who does not enjoy writing SQL, instead of working on the editor, if you clicked on the designer, now what the designer allows you to do is it actually allows you to write SQL queries but visually. For example, if I clicked on add table and if I clicked on product now, I get to see my table in front of me. Now let's say if I want to quickly build a query which displays its name, SKU, and price, I'll double click on name, I'll double click on SKU, and then I'll double click on price. And as you can see, they appear on the bottom because I've selected them all. And now I click on run, and now I get to build my query. And it's that easy. Okay, one more thing, that any changes that you do inside the designer will be converted right back into the SQL if you click on SQL, as you can see. And any changes that you do inside your SQL can be converted right back into a designer. So it's a to and fro relationship. If you feel like working on the visual designer one day, feel like you're working on the designer, and the next day you can immediately commit into SQL. You're not restricted to anymore. Okay, so I quickly click on save. Once I'm done saving, I click on the fields tab to check what all fields are in my query. And as said, we have our name, SKU, and price. Once I'm satisfied with my query, I'll just click on save, and I'm done saving. Okay, so if you remember, our query had no records in it because when we run it simply said no records. So what I would like to do right now is that I would like to connect our table, which is a product table, to a form so that we can actually start populating it and actually start adding some data in it. So in order to make forms inside 5, we simply click on Visual and then Form Wizard. Once I'm inside the Form Wizard, first it asks me for which data source I would like to build a form of. So here I can select my query and my table. So let's select a table here because that makes more sense. And as soon as I select table, you see 5 automatically fills in most of my information for me. So I'll simply click on next here. And again, 5 has done most of my work for me. What essentially it's telling here is that I have a form with these 3 fields, name, SKU, and price with its respective captions. And there are a bunch of its details over here, which I can change. I can change the display types. I can change if they're dependent on any other field or not. But again, I would like to keep things simple for this demo and just hit on save. And I'm done with my form. What I'll do now is I'll just simply click on run and show you how these small changes have affected our end user application. Essentially, we have just built a table and attached that to a form. And let's see how that changes the database, our end user application. Okay, so as you can see, my app already looks a little different. On the left, we can see we have a menu item called as products. And here now I have this interface through which I can actually start populating my table. For example, if I click on add item, I get to see all of my fields here. Let's just start populating it. I'll just call it the first product, product 1. Product 1, let's give it a SKU 123 and price of 99.99. And let's click on save. Let's add in one more record. I'll call it product 2. SKU can be 321, and this time it can be 199.99. Let's click on save. And now as you can see on the left-hand side, I have both of my products in here. If I click on product 1, I get all of the details of my first product. And if I click on product 2, I get all of the details of my second product. Okay, so let me just quickly exit out of this application since we now quickly built a form and we now have some data in our table. So let me just go back to our query, click on our product query, and now let's run it again. And now you see, instead of saying no records, it shows both of our products here right in front of me. Okay, now since I have some data in my query and my table, I would like to do something of it. First, I would like to convert this data into a chart so I'm able to visualize it. And second, I would like to make a report of that data. Okay, so let me quickly exit out of here and let's talk about the first thing, which is a chart. In order to make charts inside 5, we simply click on visuals and then chart wizard. Once I click on the chart wizard, I'm greeted with this with this interface. Let's start by naming my chart. I'll just call it my product chart. Set my data source as our query. In the X value column, I can select the name. And in the Y value column, I can select the price. Then I can give it a title to appear on top of the chart. So let's just call it products for now. And let's toggle to show that title. So this appears over here. And now I can change around many other things. I can also change around what kind of chart I want, from bar, horizontal bar, line, pine, etc. But I'll just keep it as bar. I can also change its color to anything else, but I like the default color. So what I'll do now is, since I'm satisfied with my chart, I'll simply click on save and I'm done. Next is I would like to use that same data, but I have to make a report out of it. So now to make a report inside 5, I simply click on visual and then reports. Once I'm inside reports, I click on add item. And now first what my report wants is a data source. So we click on data sources. Let's click on add data source. In here, I have an option between my query and my table. So let's select my table this time since we're using a query for our chart. Let's click on save. Let's go back to general. And now let's click here, which says click to add template. And now 5 essentially opens up this rich editor in front of me. Now I can use this editor to write any sort of reports that I want. From this, I can add headers, footers, I can add page numbers, page breaks, and pretty much everything else. With this interface, I can quickly even add tables and etc. But let's say that we actually do not like the rich editor, but we want to build our report through code. So what we can do is, if you click here, we can essentially convert this entire editor into HTML and CSS. So you essentially have all the fields that you want over here. That means, for example, I have some pre-written HTML over here. So I just copy that. And if I paste it over here, you see it comes with exact syntax highlighting, and I've used basic HTML. And now, if I go back to the rich editor, you see that every change that I've done in the HTML editor can be converted right back into the visual editor. And now I have a working report in front of me. So what I'll do is I simply click on save. Let's give it some title. I'll call it my product report. And now let's simply click on save. And I'm done with my report. Now what I would like to do is that I would like to put my chart and my report into my end user application. So that can be done by clicking on visual and then simply selecting menus. If you remember when we ran our application earlier, we already had a product item on a sidebar on the left. That's why we're already getting it. That's because 5 automatically adds all of your forms to your UI, but that can be toggled off. So let's add item. And now let's add our chart. So let's call it our product chart. Let's give it a menu order of second so that it appears second in the list. And the action can be a chart. Let's click on save. And now let's add another item, which will be a report. Let's go product report. Let's give it a menu order of 3 so it appears third in the list. And the action can be a report. Let's click on save. And let's run it once more. Now, whenever you see this spinner, basically then that means 5 is loading up something. And in here, it's loading up its local application, which is now loaded. And now you see I have a form. But now if I click on product chart, you can see I get to see my chart in front of me, which shows both of my details, which is product 1 with price 99.9 and product 2 with price 199.99. Now, if I click on product reports, I get to see my report right in front of me as well. Now here from this interface, you can instantly download it as a PDF with this download button, or in fact, you can print it with this print button as well. Okay, one thing that I usually like to highlight here is that, let's say if I went back to my products form, and now we add a third product, let's say product 3. Its Q can be 456, and let's give it the highest price. Let's say 299.99. And now let's click on save. And now if you go back to your charts, you see your changes are reflected live in front of you. So we get a product 3 here. And now if I go back to my report, even in the report, you can see I have an extra product 3 with the highest price. What that means is that every time there's a change in your database or something new has been added or deleted, you don't have to refresh your application again and again. It will be reflected live in front of you. Okay, so let me quickly exit out of this application. Now, essentially, since we have built a chart, a report, and a form, a couple of things I have to add over here is that currently my application looks very generic. It has a very default theme. So what I would do is I would first give it a theme so that it looks better. Second, I would like to convert this entire application into a multi-user app so that whenever I run it for the next time, I'm actually greeted with a login page and have some authentication. And third is that I would like to add a license agreement so that whenever someone is using our application for the first time, they would have to accept our terms and conditions first. Okay, So they sound like three pretty big changes, but let me show you how quickly we can do that. So our first change would be the themes. So in order to make themes inside 5, we simply click on Setup, and then we go to Themes. Inside Theme, let's add a new theme by clicking on the yellow plus button. Let's call this one Dark Theme. And now we click here, which is Create Edit Theme. And now 5 opens up this point and click theme editor in front of me. Now, backend developers are going to love this because you don't have to mess around with any CSS tool in order to change the look of your application. For example, let's say if you want to change the color of your header bar, simply click on your header bar and you just drag and drop it to any color of your choice. Similarly, you can do it for fonts as well. Let's say if I select the checkbox font, and from Roboto, I can shift it to, let's say, Helvetica. And pretty much most of the things can be changed out over here as well. But we also recognize that certain developers, they actually enjoy that freedom. And some of us, we want that flexibility and we actually enjoy writing CSS. So what we have done is, in the advanced section, we have given you the entire CSS for your entire application. So you have pretty much all the freedom that you want over here. Now, again, for example, of course, I have some pre-written CSS over here. So what I'll do is I'll just simply copy it and just replace everything over here. Just replace it. And now if I go back to themes, you see that my changes are reflected live in front of me. And essentially my theme looks already a lot different. What this means is that any changes that you do inside your advanced tab, which is a CSS, you don't have to run your application again and again. You can simply click on theme to see your changes live in front of you. Okay, so now we're done with the theme. So I quickly save it. And now I'll attach this theme to our application, and that can be done by clicking on Setup, Instances, selecting my instance from application. And now let's click on select a theme and just give it some interface. And now we are done. So that's it for themes. Now our two other changes was to convert into a multi-user and to add the license agreement. Now, again, this sounds pretty big, but I will do these changes in under a minute. So start counting. So first, let's convert our application into a multi-user application. So what I'll do is I click on the applications tab on top, which will direct me back to this menu in which we built our application for the first time. But now instead of clicking on the manage button, I click on the edit button. And now I'll notice I have this little button here called as multi-user. And when I toggle it, essentially 5 converts our entire application into a multi-user app. What this means is that it creates a login page for us. It even adds features like forgot password. And it also pushes a user table in your database, which we use to manage our users. So essentially, with one click of a button, your application is now a multi-user app. And whenever we run it for the next time, we will have a login page. Lastly, our license agreement. And you can see on the bottom, we have this field called as license agreement. So if I click over here, now 5 opens up this editor in front of me. Again, I can use this editor to type in any terms and conditions of my choice. And similarly, I can also convert this entire thing into HTML and CSS. But I use the basic editor, and let's say be like, please accept my conditions and ... Yes, that's my terms and conditions. It's pretty precise. So let's click on save. Let's click on save again. And now let's run my application again. Okay, so we added 3 changes. We added a theme, we converted the application into multi-user, and we also added a license agreement. So let's see how our app behaves now. Okay, so as we expected, we first get a login page. And whenever you get a login page for the first time inside 5, what you want to do is you want to set up the password for your admin account. And that can be done by typing in admin in the username, as well as admin in the password. Once you do that, we click on sign in, and now 5 prompts us to update our password, something more secure, which is exactly what I'll do. Select. And let's click on update password. Next, I get my terms and conditions page, which says exactly what I wanted to, which is please accept my conditions. So let's accept my conditions by clicking on this checkmark icon. And once I do that, I get access to the continue button. Let's click on continue, and bam, now inside my application. And you can see it's the exact same application. I have all of my 3 products in it, but now it looks a lot different because of our themes. Okay, one more thing, that any application that is made inside 5 is by default 100% responsive to all of the screen sizes. Let me actually show you. So I click over here, And now if we start shrinking it down and down and down, now it's just a mobile view because it's a smaller screen size. And you can even shrink it down to even ridiculous sizes. And 5 will stay responsive to everything. Okay. Okay, so let me quickly exit out of here. All right. So that was a very simple CRUD application that we built in a couple of minutes. Now let me talk about something a little more complex. Let me show you a more complex application that we built using 5. So what I'll do now is I'll open up the cloud-hosted version of 5. Okay. Now, what I have here is an application that we already made using 5. Now, it's a very simple application called, no, it's actually not, it's a very complicated application called as a property finder application. What this application has is it has 2 user roles. It has customers and administrators, where customers can actually log into this application and send in booking requests to a particular property that they would like to inspect. And once they do that, then those records are actually sent to administrators. And then administrators can actually then view at records, dashboards, and everything else. So without further ado, let me just jump onto this application. So firstly, let's log in as a customer. And let's click on sign in. Now you can see, firstly, the customers are greeted with the login page, or the landing page. And now, if you click on booking request, now we have this form through which we can start filling in my booking request. So the firstly, customers log into this application, and now they can select which property that they would like to inspect. So let's say like to this one, which is 1 Alexander Street. Now we can start by filling in my name. I'll start the name, which is Prinoy. And you notice as soon as I do that, my form expands, and now I select my booking time. So if I click over here, now 5 opens up this date and time figure in front of me. So let's select the next day, 27 September. And now I also get to select a timing. So let's say 6:30 p.m. That sounds good. And let's select OK. And now my form expands again, and I get to select my method of contact between text messages and email. Now, if I select text message, I get this field over here, which is I get this field over here, which I can pass my phone number. And when I click on this button, this phone number will be further validated using Twilio. Now, if I click on email, I get this field over here in which I can pass my email. And now emails are validated using regular expressions. For example, if I start typing in my email over here, and if I click out, I get a prompt saying it's an invalid email address. And you might have noticed even the email caption on top turns red, indicating it's not right. So let's press an @5.co. Let's make it a valid email format. And as soon as I do that, you see that the red color turns back to normal. And now if I click outside, 5 doesn't give me an error because it's a valid email format. And now I am done. Once I'm done with my form, I'll click on submit. And now these records are sent to the managers. So what I'll do is I'll log out as a customer. And now I'll log back in as an administrator. So let's click admin. And now let's click on sign in. Okay, so the first things first, you see the administrators get a notification that exactly at 11:28, which is our time, 11:28, we have received a booking request. Now the managers know that someone has made a booking request. Now, other things you might have noticed is that the application looks a little different for the managers. That is because we have a bunch of other menu items over here. But since we have a notification that someone has made a booking request, so we'll simply jump on management. And now what we can do is we can look at data sets, which has custom charts and reports. We also have dashboards with a radar chart, bar graph, and further reports showing us all of the details. We can also send out survey requests to a particular customer about a particular property. Also, we can look at individual bookings. And with one click of a button, we can send a confirmation email to any of the customers who have tried to make a booking. Now, if I go more into this application, there is a lot more to talk about. Like if we click on suburbs, we have all of our suburbs with their custom ratings in here as well. Also an image library which contains image of the properties. But what I would like to talk about is the high code functionality of 5, the ability to use full code. So for example, if I go into booking request and when we fill in a form, let me quickly do it. And now I click on text messages. I said that whenever we type in a phone number and we click on this button, these text messages are validated using Twilio. So what's essentially happening in the back is that we are actually calling a very simple JavaScript function, which does the validation for us. So let me jump back into the development environment of 5. Now, this is the development environment for this property finder application. As you can see, it's called 5 demo, not my first app. So what I'll do is I click on logic, and then I click on code editor. Once I'm inside the code editor, now basically 5 basically opens up this code editor, which will resemble VS Code, so that developers have that familiarity. Now, if I click on open existing functions, and over here, you can see I have some functions, some JavaScript functions over here. And if I keep on scrolling to the bottom, you see I have 2 other types of functions as well. If I click on the last one, which is validated phone number server, I get this code, which is doing our Twilio validation for us. Now, essentially, it's a very simple piece of code where we are calling this post request to this basic URL provided to us by Twilio.
I believe we lost Pranay just now. Is that right? Can you still see Pranay? Okay, Pranay dropped out. Something went wrong with his computer. Sorry about that, everyone. I believe Pranay was just explaining the Twilio API. So what he wanted to show was that inside 5, you can actually write JavaScript the way you would inside your usual Visual Studio Code editor. And you can extend applications built in 5 with any kind of custom code, whether that's a calculated field, if you wanted to use JavaScript for that, whether that's calling an API and triggering a text message inside of Twilio, whether you wanted to post a message into a Slack channel, you could use standard JavaScript or TypeScript to do that inside of 5. And you can attach these functions to events. So whatever an end user does inside the application, whether that's clicking a button, exiting a form field, entering a form field, the code can be called and triggered based on the end user action, which is, for those of you who are familiar with programming, that's event-driven programming that we're using, and we're attaching functions to events. So I see Pranay is coming back. Pranay, I'll give you a second to start sharing your screen again. I don't know what happened, but I was just explaining that functions can be attached to events, and that functions can be used to extend 5 or connect 5 to external systems. And that makes 5 quite powerful, because even if you want to create something that's very unique to your application, you can actually just use full code to do that. So we're not limiting you to visual interfaces. You can always write code the way you would inside your traditional development processes.
Okay, right. So where did I leave? At which point did I leave, Dom? Second.
You stopped right at the Twilio API. I believe you were about to explain it using our AI explanation feature.
Yes, exactly. So as Dom said, I can go around and I can explain this entire piece of code to you. So this is our code which does the Twilio integration for us. Essentially, it's a very simple piece of code which sends this post request to this URL provided to us by Twilio. Now I can go around and explain this entire piece of code to you, but just as Dom said, I can highlight this entire code and I can click on this button and ask 5 to explain our code to us. So basically what 5 is doing here is that it's using OpenAI and its own AI assistant to read this code and evaluate it. And now you can see it just explains the entire thing to us. So it says this code is using the 5 library to send an HTTP post request to the Twilio API in order to send an SMS. And it bunch of everything. It's explaining every single thing inside the code, and that too in pointers. And not only that, let's say that we have some error in our code. Let me just remove this curly braces. Let's say we have some error in our code. Now, similarly, instead of explaining it to 5, what I can do is I can just ask 5 to check for errors. So now 5, instead of evaluating your code and trying to explain it, it looks for errors, and instantly it tells me that you have a curly braces missing. So let's go ahead and add that. And now I'm good to go. So essentially, the code editor inside 5 is really powerful. Not only does it resembles a lot of things like a normal code editor, it also has inbuilt AI assistant that you can start using. Now, what this means is that the code in front of you, we are using, as I said earlier, we are using this post request, this Twilio API, to this URL which is given to us by Twilio. Now, what this means is that when we integrate things through code, that means you're not limited to any third-party service which has built-in integration with 5. It means that if you have a third-party service and it has an endpoint, that can be used inside 5 as well, either through code or either through the connection wizard, which I showed you earlier. Okay, so enough of code and everything else. Now we talked about actually building applications. We talked about working on pre-existing applications. So let me quickly talk about maintaining applications now. So inside 5, we have this little tab called as tools. Now 5 uses some of these tools which you can use to maintain applications. So for example, first is our code analyzer. Yes, I already started my changes. Yes. Now what the code analyzer does is it essentially shows you every single piece of function, SQL, and process that you have written inside 5. So as you can see, we have functions here, which basically gives me the ID of its functions, the number of lines inside them, and with a single click of a button, I can get redirected into that function as well. Similar with queries and processes as well. Now, if you just look at the functions and if you do simple maths and we add the number of lines of code, you see that this entire application was built with less than around 200 lines of code. And essentially, it's a pretty complicated application. It's doing a lot of things. And if you try to build this app in high code, I'm pretty sure it would take you way more line than that. So that's one of the things. So with tools, other thing I will talk about is our audit trail. So if we go to audit trail, what the audit trail does is it asks you for a from and a to date. If we select, let's say if we go back to our 1st July, let's select any time, and we select today, which is 26th. Now, basically what 5 is doing is that from 1st of July till today, which is 26th of September, it's showing me every single piece of change that has been happened in my application over that period of time. So as you can see, the first change was made at a table level. It was made by this person. You can look at which person actually changed it with the system, the action that was done, when exactly was that done. And again, with a single click of a button, I can view that change instantly. And you can see, since we are actually looking at changes over like 2 months of time, it's a huge list. So, and if we actually keep on scrolling down, you'll see essentially I was using the system account, but then in future, I shifted to a different account. And now you can see the future changes were made by Pranoy Sarkar, which is a different account. So you can even track the users. Now, for example, let's say that we are using 5 and we are working on an application. Let's say we are a developer who's working with a few other developers and we are building an application together. And let's say that we just pushed a feature, and from the audit trail, we figured out that some other developer made changes into our feature, and now our application is completely broken. Now the question is, how do we revert back to our old changes? Again, for example, let me elaborate on this further. Let's say if we go back to our functions and we selected our validated phone number server, which is our Twilio function. Now here, let's say that a developer came and they changed the naming of your function or changed something else. Actually, a better example would be queries for you. Actually, over here. So if I open up this code, let's say that a developer came and they pushed some error into your code. Let's say we remove this curly braces and we clicked on save. Actually, let's also change the name, validate phone. Yes, so essentially, let's say a developer came and they made some changes into your function. They removed that curly braces and they also changed the naming of your function. We clicked on save. Let's change it over here as well. And we clicked on save again. So essentially now my function is ruined. Now the question is, how do I revert back to my old changes? Now, every component or every feature inside 5 will have this little history button over here. What this means is if you click on it, now here, first thing my button is showing me that at 11:38, which is the current time, a change was made into my function, which is what we did right now. We changed its name to validated phone and we removed that curly braces. Now what I can do is I can simply drag it back to our old change, which we wanted at 10:12. And we click on edit. Now you can see my naming is back to normal. And if I go back to my code, you can see my curly braces is back again. And over here also my naming is back here. What this means is that any change inside 5 can be reverted back to its old change over any period of time. So every change inside the history tab is recorded and you can easily revert back to your old changes. Now, one last thing I will talk about is that we talked about building applications. We talked about working on top of applications and even maintaining applications. Let's quickly talk about how you can debug your applications as well. So if you see, we have 2 buttons here, which is run. And next to run, we also have this button called as run the inspector. So if I click on that, now 5 essentially opens up my application in a debug mode. And now if I log in as an administrator, and let's click on sign in. Yes, please. And now I'm inside my same property finder application, but now I have access to this built-in inspector, through which I can actually start using and debugging my application. Now, this is a very powerful inspector through which I can actually see every single log that has been happening in my application or from any function, the execution tree of how functions were being called in the back, the queries, and even the environment variables. So for example, let's say if I click on queries and we went to management and we clicked on one of the management menus, let's say if we go on data sets. In data sets, what's happening is that we are actually showing you a chart and a report. And basically, both the charts and the reports are using the same query to get the data. And now if I open up the inspector, you can see the inspector exactly tells me that this query was called twice, one for the chart and one for the report. Now, if I clicked on it, it just opens up the query right in front of me. And now I can look at the query. And if I click on after query, basically now if I was passing any dynamic variables into the query, it would have shown all the variables over here. And if I click on results, again, it shows all the variables on top, as well as it shows the entire result from my query right here in my inspector. And not only that, let me actually show you how it handles the execution tree. So for example, if I went back to my customer form, and if I select one, let me just quickly fill it up. And let me get a date and time. Let's select email this time, Prannoy@5.co. And now, when I click on submit, we essentially run a JavaScript function in the back, which handles the submission for us. We click on submit. You see 5 tells me that this function was invoked. So I click on that. I get to see my entire function in front of me. And not only that, if I click on function variables, I get to see every variable that was passed into this function and every variable that this function is creating from results. And if I click on the execution log, it shows me what all functions is this particular code using. So you can see it uses HTTP clients and uses 5.logs to do the logging for us. Now, if I go back to a function, you can see this particular code is also calling an SQL query. Now, if I go back to queries, 5 again tells me that a query was called from a function. So I click on that. Now it opens that query that we passed into our function. And if I click on after query, it also shows me what variable was passed into it. And again, if I click on results, it shows me the result of that query as well. So it's a very powerful debugger that I actually use all the time to debug my applications. Now, if I go back to the development environment, there is a lot of things I can talk about over here. A lot of other things like other tools, other setups, and etc. But due to shortage of time, I like to keep things short. And I like to end the demo over here, and I pass it back to Dom. So what do you, Dom?
Thanks, Prannoy. Excellent. Now, that was a very quick introduction to some of 5's features. As Prannoy said, there's a lot more inside of 5 that we could show you. But given the amount of time, in fact, we're a little bit behind schedule already. We tried to keep it concise and give you an overview of the most important features that you can find inside of 5. Now, there's one more thing that I would like to share before we open up for Q&A. And that is just our website. So if you would like to start using 5 and if you would like to start building your own application with it, simply go onto 5.co, find any of these sign up buttons right here. Once you've signed up, you'll get an email from us with a serial number and you can download 5 for free and you can start building applications locally. You can test them locally. And if you would like to deploy them to the cloud, that's when you come back to us and you sign up for one of our subscription plans. Now, one other very useful website, that's our community website, and you can find the link right here at the top. So if you click on community, it will take you to 5.org. And what you can do here is you can post questions on how to build things inside of 5. A lot of people have asked questions already. So if you need any help or if you hit any roadblocks in your development, feel free to visit 5.org and ask your questions right here. We typically get back to you within the same day. And we try to give you the right answers to build whatever you'd like to build on top of 5. Cool. Now we still have a little bit of time, or we'll stay online in case someone has any questions for us. I saw some people have used the Q&A feature already. So if you do have a question, simply open up the Q&A feature inside of Zoom, post your question right there, and we'll give you a response. I suppose we can respond to them verbally now, since we're open for Q&A. Maybe I'll kick things off. I just saw that one came in. What is it? Thanks for the well-run demo. Thanks for the session. Thanks, Vern. Thanks for joining. That's very kind of you to give those feedback. I'm glad you enjoyed it. It's really awesome. Now, Pranoy, maybe I have one question for you, because that's a question that we do get a lot. Typically, people understand that Five can connect to any kind of data source. You have your inbuilt MySQL database, you can connect to external relational databases, or you can use an API as a data source.
Yes.
But then the question is, what can you do on the UI side? So how can you change the UI? So
Okay.
maybe if you have a little bit of time, you can quickly open up Five again and show the UI options that we give to developers.
Absolutely. So essentially, Five actually gives you a little flexibility on the UIs. Let me just open up my screen again. And let's share it. So I'm back into our original application that we first created, to which we attached our theme. So now if I click on manage, if you remember earlier when we made our theme, I went to instances. And inside instances, I attached my theme. And over here, I also have this option called as user interfaces. And currently I have selected Boston. So let's say if I select New York now, and now I run my application, you see now I get a different user interface from app. So apart from building my theme, Five also gives you two inbuilt user interface through which you can actually control the layout of your menus. So if I log in now, if you remember how our menu items and my entire structure of a menu was appeared on the left-hand side, and now you can see my entire user interface has shifted on the top side. And now it works just like a navigation bar. So I click on products, I get my products, I click on product chart, I get to see my chart. And similarly, if I click on users to see all of my users, you get to see them as well. Similarly with the reports. So we have some flexibility with the UI as well.
Basically, the idea is that whatever you define as your application inside of Five and what you built, it's independent of the UI. How you want to present that application is really, you get these different options. By the way, you can also add buttons into your applications. You saw that in the property finder application that we showed you at the end. You can have parent and child menus. And it's really up to you how you want to use the screen space that Five makes available for you. You are building for the web, so all of these applications run inside a web browser. And depending on how much screen space you need, you can put the menu on the left, you can put it on the top, and you can play around with it. If you build a dashboard, maybe Pranoy, that's something else you could quickly show. You can actually define a grid inside your dashboard. And inside that grid, you can position different elements. So what you can do right here is you can define columns and rows. And that gives you a sort of UI grid, and then you can put charts, reports, forms, whatever you need into the grid as you need.
So if I put over here and inside actions, let me just put like a chart on top, which is a chart, and done. And let me just at the bottom, maybe we can put our report. And let's save again. Let me go back to my menus and add the dashboard as a menu item. I'll call it my dashboard. Menu order of 4, so that appears 4th on the lists, and select a dashboard over here. And let's click on save. And essentially that's how we build dashboards. I'll click on run now. Now, basically we are loading up. Can you see the application? Yep, that's loaded up.
Yep.
And now let's log in as an admin. Now I get my products, my product charts, my reports, and a dashboard here as well. So my dashboard here is essentially in a full screen. So that's why I cannot see the product charts, but that's how you can control your grids and layouts here as well. If I just go down to the bottom. Yes. So do you have any other questions?
There's another question in the Q&A section from Daniel. Can you define a custom widget element and place that in a page while still having access to Five controlled elements around that? The short answer is yes. Do you want to comment on that, Pranoy? Or Mark, do you want to unmute yourself and take the question?
What's on Mark?
Sorry. Can you define a custom widget app and place that in a page while still having access to the Five controlled element? Yes, you can develop plugins and put those into any web page. So, for instance, where you saw Pranoy activating the SQL editor or any of those components. They're all custom plugins that Five has developed and put into the page. Basically, an important thing to look at with this is that Five is actually written in Five. So all of the features that you've seen Pranoy do, you can put into your own applications without issue. Hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah, I would like to just add one more thing to that. Basically, you can build any of your components inside inside like say React or Angular, and you can use those and make them into a plugin and also import them inside Five as your own custom components. So hopefully that answers your question, Daniel.
Right.
Yes. Do we have any other questions?
Keeping an eye on the Q&A. As I said, we'll stay here for a few more minutes. So if anyone else has any questions, feel free to drop them into the Q&A. If not, thanks everyone for joining, obviously. And we'll conclude the webinar. Do feel free, as I said, no rush. We still have a couple of minutes. If someone has questions, drop them in the Q&A. If not, feel free to drop out of the Zoom call. And thanks everyone already for joining.